Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I trust our tech folks will let me know if there's any trouble with that. Thank you very much for tuning in, and many thanks to the Forest Service for hosting this webinar on this topic and inviting me and David to be part of it. It's already been so interesting for me to listen to David's presentation. Over the next few minutes, I will briefly ground us in some context about the challenge of rising heat and the role that shade plays. I will then share a collaboration that combined art and science in LA surrounding this topic. And then I will circle back to David and the Nature of Cities to share how we took our little local project and leveraged it to speak to an international audience. So I live in Los Angeles, and when I speak to folks from other places about what images LA conjures up, I generally hear three things: cars, palm trees, and sunshine. And yes, I can hear the tree folks among you pointing out that palm trees aren't actually trees. So, okay, we'll just call them palms. So in the mid-20th century, people moved to LA in droves, seeking opportunity in a city blessed with sunny weather and a favorable climate year-round. But as the planet warms, LA and cities around the world are shattering climate records year after year. The climate patterns that were once considered to be a blessing for the LA region, and perhaps in the region that you live in as well, are creating a harsh and unforgiving reality for many people. Now, imagine that you were one of the people pictured on this slide. Whether you lack housing, like the individual sitting in the sliver of shade in the top photo, or you lack access to good insulation and air conditioning, or are exposed to the elements in your line of work. The urban spaces through which you move present a balance between how much heat is retained in the urban environment and how much of it is dissipated. And if it's retained, then it must be absorbed elsewhere, and that includes in the human body. This is important because in an average year, heat causes more deaths than all other weather-related causes combined, and cities around California and many other parts of the US are no exception. And reducing urban heat exposure by increasing access to shade is fundamentally an equity issue because low-income communities and people of color are more likely to live in neighborhoods with fewer trees, poor insulation, more heat-retaining surfaces, limited access to cool indoor spaces, and yes, also less shade. Now, one of the primary ways to weave cooling shade into the urban fabric is by planting and caring for trees. But supporting urban forestry as a strategy to mitigate heat is not an easy proposition in many American cities. And perhaps this is especially true for cities in arid and semi-arid climates like Los Angeles. If you were any one of these trees on the slide, and yes, that takes a little imagination, but I think you can all take David's suggestion and imagine yourself to be one of these trees, you would have a whole host of issues to contend with. You may have to deal with being too large a species planted in too small a space, as we see on the left, which then results in pavement conflict. You may have to deal with power line conflicts, again, due to limited foresight of what to plant where. You may have to contend with poor pruning that prevents ecological, and I would definitely say aesthetic functions from being maximized. And you may also face development trends that favor building lot line to lot line, as we see on the right, which leaves little outdoor space for any vegetation. And because you're planted in a semi-arid Mediterranean climate, you will see many months each year with little to no rain. Even cities in the desert Southwest, for example, Phoenix or Las Vegas, they get summer monsoons to help, but here in LA, we don't have such luck. This is especially problematic during drought years, and we are seeing that even the hardiest of native species that have evolved to our historical climate are suffering as the dry periods get longer and more intense. So we know that there's a lot of education and engagement that we need to do to get people to give trees a hand so that those trees can survive and even thrive. In my line of work, I primarily engage with these issues through science and practice. But in the past few months, it's been my great pleasure to weave another aspect of my life as an artist and curator into the mix. I sit on the executive oversight team of the LA Center for Urban Natural Resources Sustainability, which is a research and information hub for enhancing ecosystems and well-being, which is operated through a partnership among the Forest Service, Pacific Southwest Research Station, the City of LA, and partners from many other sectors. The LA Urban Center was very interested in finding local opportunities to engage audiences around environmental and climate science via art programming, and it sounded like a great idea to me to do so. And moving in this direction and combining these two previously separate aspects of my life has been gratifying and a really interesting experience for me. And I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about why I've found it so fulfilling and productive. Now, living in a post-truth era, as we are, means that many of our fellow humans experience an outsized amount of their daily interactions through content that's generated by virtually anyone with access to the internet. I would say that it's a Shakespearean irony that at this very moment, when we have access to information more than really ever before, the sheer volume of information seems to not really be making us any wiser, but rather drowning us in a sea of content overload and confusion. What does this have to do with art and science? Well, the good news is that the act of connecting art and science can be an antidote to this predicament of content overload and confusion. I believe that public engagement through the truths that art and science can deliver together can move people from observers or consumers to participants and actors, affecting the way that we think and act. Combined, art and science deliver a 1-2 punch of fact and emotion, leaving the viewer, visitor, or participant to complete the exchange by reaching a deepened understanding of a change of heart, a change of mind, or better yet, being moved to actually take action. At the intersection of art and science, I see Aristotle's artistic proofs in action. These artistic proofs, if you're not familiar with them, they're essentially means of persuasion that make an argument more effective. They are logos, or the logical part of the argument, pathos, or the emotional part of the argument, and ethos, or the ethical part of the argument. In the space where art and science meet, we rely on an interdisciplinary collaboration for these to be parts that come together as a whole. In my view, in the environmental space, there is no one person or source that has a monopoly on making a compelling argument that can move people to action. Rather, I think it's in the interstitial and the collaborative spaces that we really do our best. So in this case, logos would be represented by, science as the facts are delivered through scientific discussion. Pathos is represented, I would argue, by art in whatever form, as that art serves to move the audience emotionally. And ethos is represented by the viewer or participant's interpretation and how they choose to respond. With the logical and emotional part of the interaction, the viewer or participant can make this exchange whole by responding to messaging, checking in with their gut, and deciding how to engage. Spurred by the LA Urban Center's challenge to bring together art and science, I was honored to help build a partnership to support a group of artists and activists in LA's Highland Park neighborhood. Working with nonprofit arts organization Arroyo Arts Collective, who gave us a lot of freedom with regard to the theme and execution of the project, we decided to focus on the topic of shade equity in an outdoor public art installation called Shade in LA, Rising Heat Inequity in a Sunburnt City. And here you see some of the promotional posters that we created. 17 artists used repurposed umbrellas as their canvas to present a full spectrum of takes on the topic of shade equity. The umbrellas were suspended high up so people could walk or sit under them, and the umbrellas swung around in the wind and shined differently in the sun. The partnership took an action-oriented approach, and the opening and closing events included engagement activities meant to appeal to a wide cross-section of community members, many who told us that they never thought about how shade access is not the same in all neighborhoods and how it impacts them. Here are some of the images of the outdoor public art installation and the community events that we held. The topics seemed to really resonate with people, and we were grateful to get the attention of entities such as the LA Times, whose staff photographer Gennaro Molino documented the events. You can see these photos by him. And the Sierra Club, which invited us to author a guest blog post that went out to a distribution of more than 1 million people. We hosted a free tree adoption event with the support of the organization's Northeast Trees and City Plants, and more than 70 shade and fruit trees were adopted by community members. And admittedly, some of the folks that ended up visiting the exhibit were there because they wanted a free tree, but we, ended up having wonderful conversations with them, regardless of their intent there. We also interacted with folks by sharing some facts and stories about shade equity, and then inviting them to share what access to shade means to them. Now I'd like to share just a bit about some of the artists and the works that they created, though there are way more than I have time to share, so consider this just an appetizer. And hopefully you can spend some time on the website later. We'll give you the link shortly. Shantae Benefield grew up in LA's San Gabriel Valley, where she told me, quote, "There are neighborhoods where hiking the wilderness starts when you cross the street, and when fruit trees bloom, it smells divine." Shantae painted 2 umbrellas for the show. Cool Canopy on the right is meant to evoke the feeling of being under a leafy, inviting canopy. Redlined No Shade on the left is her take on federal maps created in the 1930s that encouraged segregation by denying investment based on race, a practice whose legacy, as many of you probably know, is still evident in neighborhoods of color that have fewer trees and are hotter than wealthier areas. Diana Coney is an artist with a knack for depicting LA's sun-baked urban sprawl, which is a style that she brings to her exploration of shade equity. On the underside of her umbrella, in the coolness of the shade with the white icons, Diana invites her audience to contemplate how the comforts of privilege, from fossil fuel intensive travel to insatiable consumerism, contribute to the real life tragedies and discomfort of low-income, elderly, unshaded communities whose experiences are depicted on the top of the sun-drenched umbrella. Joe Bravo grew up on the US-Mexico border in the town of Calexico, where he cultivated a special connection to California's desert lands. In recent years, Joe has grown concerned about the unpredictable weather. He says, quote, "One week it's below average weather, the next, it's broiling hot. Oh, and hardly any rain." Joe's artwork tackles a major cause of that unpredictability. He explains that we are caught in a spider's web of oil consumption that covers the world. We should be, he says, conserving our natural resources and developing reusable energy alternatives. And then there's Angela Hernandez. Angela is a 17-year-old emerging artist who draws inspiration from the landscapes of her home in California. She told me, quote, "As a former foster youth, I've lived in many different environments, from the Inland Empire to our beautiful beaches. And these are places which she is worried are being impacted by drought. She told me, I'm concerned about how our lands will be in the future. Will California completely dry up? We only get one Earth, and I feel we should treasure it." And I really love this one. Angela amplifies her message in her work. Her umbrella tackles environmental issues affecting places near and far, and she reminds us to appreciate and improve our relationship to urban and wildlands by being active stewards. Continuing with that partnership of art and science organizations and with support from Forest Service Region 5, we worked together with nonprofit arts organization Avenue 50 Studio to issue a call for artists to join a group art exhibition titled "Taking It to the Next Degree: Rising Action to Meet Rising Heat, Drought, and Wildfire." We got more than 70 submissions to be in that show, and it was really hard to select just some of these and fit them all inside the gallery. We provided the artists with scientific and other informational resources that they could explore about climate change impacts. And we created a bridge to scientists that they could connect with if they so chose. In the photo, you can see this is when we had an artist's walkthrough of the exhibit where each artist spoke about their interpretation on the topic of climate change. We also invited viewers to share their perspectives, and you see a couple of their responses on the right to prompts about changes in the weather that people have noticed and sustainable habits that they use or would like to try. This exhibit is composed of dozens of works, and here are just three to give you a taste. A catalog is available on Avenue 50 Studios website. We'll pop a link in the chat so you can check that out. And the show will also be traveling to El Pueblo in the center of Los Angeles in the coming weeks. As part of the programming for this exhibit, for taking it to the next degree, we also hosted a panel exploring the question of how art and science intersect to inform climate action with panelists representing both the creative arts and the natural and social sciences. And I had just a ton of fun hearing what people had to say about how these two areas come together. Now, back to the umbrellas. The Shade in LA installation came down in June, and we thought that would be the end of that project. But we found that the theme really sparked a lot of interest, and we weren't quite ready to say goodbye. Now, thanks to a connection that we got through the Forest Service Region 5, we were introduced to David Maddox and the Nature of Cities. And David's group started doing virtual exhibits during COVID for artists who had lost their shows due to venues being closed. So they came to doing those for that reason, but they continued doing the virtual exhibits because they get really broad reach, and now they do them for that reason. So after an introductory conversation rather with my group that put together the LA shows, we knew that our first collaboration was right in front of us. We wanted to turn the Shade in LA installation into a digital experience that would be relevant to audiences around the world. And we're happy to share this digital experience with you, which we just launched. In fact, you're our first audience. We just hit go yesterday. And rather than give you sort of a choppy live demo, we'll just show you some of what we did here and encourage you to check it out on your own time. And I have to give a shout out to our web developer, Karen Sugawa, who is just a wizard of all things visual and interactive in the digital space. So David explained to me that they really aim to innovate in the sort of experience that people have, helping people, as he says, go sideways in the exhibits to follow whatever resonates with them. So to that end, we created a central map of all of the artworks with each one hot linked, so you can move around the digital space easily. You just kind of scroll over an umbrella, click, and then get a preview, and then you click and you get directed down to that part of the page so that it's easy to navigate to different parts of the exhibit via the icons, all over, not only on the map, but also the ones that you see on the left side there. So then you get popped down to one of the umbrellas, and the Nature of Cities digital exhibits always include reactions and meditations by non-artists that are responding to the work, which helps to create that transdisciplinary space that David was talking about. Here you can see a reaction to Shantae Benefield's umbrella on redlining by Dr. Vivek Chandas, who is a professor and practitioner who has published on how redlining impacts tree cover and heat 50 years after the federal practice actually became outlawed. We also created a space where people can see how some of the visitors to the exhibit responded to the prompt, "What does access to shade mean to you?" So they filled out these paper leaves, which you can see here, and those were hung in the exhibition space. Now we have an opportunity to share those digitally. So hopefully by now, I don't have the chat on, but hopefully the link for the digital exhibition is in the chat or will be shortly. And we hope that you'll take time to not only explore it, but also please share it with your networks. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. Here again, at the top is the link and some other ways to connect. And I think we're probably ready to take some questions now. Of course, David, if I missed anything about the exhibit, and any of the intent that you had behind it with Nature of Cities hosting this, by all means, I think folks would love to hear that.